Joel, we've been having this conversation about kind of the tiers of business growth. That's 6 million, 10 million, 15, 20 million. And last time we did an overarching view of that and some of the barriers. I know one of those near and dear to your hearts is capital. So tell us about that. Why is that a barrier?
So, I want to distinguish between the imaginary barrier and the real barrier of capital.
Yeah.
And let's start with the real barrier of capital. The reality is your business cannot grow any faster than the cash that you have available to grow that business. Ultimately, whether you can borrow it or not, it has to come out of earnings that drive the cash flow of the business. So capital is a very real barrier to growth. And a lot of companies, when owners are used to taking out their distribution and leaving very little back in the company, harm themselves in their pursuit of growth because there's no money to grow. Your vendors aren't going to extend your credit line. Your bank's not going to credit your line. Where's the money going to come from that allow you to make the extra additional hires? And so there is a very true barrier of capital in running businesses. And so you have to and understand that to grow your business, you're going to have to make investments, mostly in our industry, in people. And of course, there's the age-old question: is that it's not a fixed asset, so how do I call that an investment? But you and I both believe in the power of investing in people.
Absolutely.
And their growth and their capabilities and in their skills. And then, frankly, as we talked about in the last one of the big barriers is the simple fact that the owners won't invest in a management structure that allow them to grow. And guess what? That requires capital. And so at the heart of this question of a barrier to growth is a capital question. But interestingly enough, there's the fictional capital question, which is every owner I've ever met says, I just don't have enough capital. And the reality is they may not be deploying their capital correctly as opposed to not having capital. So when I hear owners talk about, I could grow more if I had more capital, usually it's wishful thinking because they don't really have a strategic plan they could put them in. In their mind is like, well, my competitor's got 5 salespeople, I have 2. So obviously if I just hired 3 salespeople, I would be as good as my competitor. Or some other nonsense,
Right.
Using a false equivalence that says, if only I had more money, I could waste it in more ways. And so that's a fictional notion of capital being a barrier because you don't have a plan. You don't have a strategic plan. You don't have proof of it. I've always been very governed in all the companies I've run with the discipline of my net income is my growth engine for the future. So either I'm generating it and I start small and I test it and I make sure it works and then I can grow from there. And so there's the true capital barrier that every company faces. And then there's the fictional capital barriers that owners tend to hide behind is like, well, I can't grow because they just don't have capital. No, that's probably not your limiting factor. Your limiting factor is probably you don't have a strategic plan. You aren't making true commitments to the markets you want to grow into, and you're not executing those plans, and you're not generating an income from the plans you are making that allow you to take the next stage of growth. So look in the mirror and ask yourself, are my capital barriers true? Or are they just allowing me to be stuck as a willing hostage?
Right. And I think it's in that frame, it's using that capital as an investment versus a spend.
Exactly. Right.
And I think that's, if I'm going to hire techs, PMs, all that, they're not going to be 85% utilized on day one. They need to be trained. All that comes from some pot of money. And so it's, again, kind of paying the company back and it's not that slush fund, it's that investment fund that says, now I can actually hire people and ramp them up well because I have the money to do so. And again, it takes a plan.
Yeah, and so I like to call that the discipline of earnings, right? So that I have to generate earnings from every dollar I spend. Otherwise, it just becomes a spend plan, and then we see companies, overspend and then retreat back, and so what is the investment strategy that I'm deploying this with? And with human capital, It is way more difficult, but I can promise you it's not just go hire 3 people, whether
No.
they're in sales or they're in operations. That is not going to solve your growth needs. What's going to solve your growth needs is the discipline of earnings that says, I have an investment return. You and I talk about this all the time internally.
Yes, we do.
Right? What is my investment return on my internal dollars that I'm putting towards getting better? And as long as I have an investment return, then I can afford to make that capital investment in people so that I can drive the company to new successes going forward. So
Great.
It all ties together.
It does, and lots of variables, but I think it's that intention and that in plan. And again, pay yourself first.
Pay yourself.
It's like that's your investment fund. Great. Thanks, Joel.
Thank you so much. It's great to talk about this topic.